Today, we are gathered here to pay tribute to those brave daughters and sons of Tibet, and to remember the sacrifice in our present-day struggle to restore freedom and peace in Tibet. Since the tragic yet historic event, Tibetans in Tibet have continued to stand against the illegal occupation, undeterred by the repression and persecution. Tibetans rose against the invasion of Tibet by Communist China in 1949 and 50, and then they continued to resist against the injustice of Chinese rule in 1959, which led to the death of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, again in 1987, 88, 89 continuously, and then 2008. They constantly defy and protest against the Chinese rule and seek for His Holiness to return to his homeland. In 2009, at breaking point, Tibetans began another form of protest, self-immolation, a tragic act arising from the anguish of oppression. The number of deaths caused by self-immolation is at a staggering figure of 154 Tibetans to date. The latest being the 24-year-old Yunten from Ngaba, who passed away after self-immolation on 26 November 2019. After 61 years of illegal, ruthless, and inhuman occupation of Tibet by the Chinese, Tibetans in Tibet are not broken. In fact, they are more steadfast, more determined, and reject the Chinese illegal occupation and unjust rule. China finds Tibetan language, Tibetan religion, and culture as the main barrier to achieve complete control over Tibet. Therefore, the Chinese have now stepped up their effort through the systematic method of so-called Sinicization, and they are now imposing Han-centric Chinese culture values in Tibet. On Tibetan language, China's bilingual education policy is a direct attack on the use of Tibetan language by Tibetans. On 4th March 2020, the Human Rights Watch report highlights that the threat to the Tibetan language in China forces politically motivated bilingual education policies in Tibet, such as imposing of compulsory Chinese language at the kindergarten level. In 2019, the Chinese authorities in Golok have mandatorily ordered the primary and middle school to teach Chinese instead of Tibetan. In Nakchen, the authorities banned Tibetan children from attending language classes in monasteries during school holidays, calling it an illegal study. Tashi Ongchu, a Tibetan language activist who appealed that Tibetans should be allowed to learn Tibetan, has been labeled as a separatist and imprisoned, and is still serving imprisonment. On religion, China has continued to impose very heavy-handed control on monastic education. The right to become nuns and nuns are restricted, controlled, imposing and where they can study, and the freedom of movement within Tibet by Tibetans are restricted. From May to August of last year, the Chinese government has forcibly evicted 7,100 monks, nuns, and Buddhist practitioners from Yashankar Buddhist Institute amidst ongoing demolition. Many of the evictees were forced into so-called patriotic re-education camps, and 6,000 Chinese officials were permanently deployed to control the administrative functions of the Buddhist institutions. The Chinese Communist Party continues to ban all retired Tibetan party cadres from taking any part in religious activities. A new law called the Ethnic Unity Law will come into effect in May of this year in the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. This new law was passed by the 11th Tibetan Autonomous Region's People's Congress on January 11th of this year. This regulation will give government powers to enforce Han Chinese-centric way of life and has the potential to achieve complete Sinicization of the Tibetan Plateau. This regulation is a legal articulation of long-held policy goal of Beijing to reduce ethnic differences and achieve Han Chinese society throughout China by dilution and departure from the principles and the preference treatment stipulated in the regional autonomous laws. My fellow countrymen, friends and supporters, last year I said we need to reset, and the narration was Tibet was never part of China, but the middle way approach is a solution. The Central Tibetan administration is sincere in our approach, but we find China has no political will to resolve the issue of Tibet. We believe completely and wholeheartedly that communism in China has a finite life, and it will not be there forever. That I'm sure. The sooner the better. Few politicians in the United States sees the raging coronavirus in China as an opportunity to turn the Chinese people against the government. Not quite a call for regime change, but it is a thought process that we should keep in mind. More and more countries now perceive China as a security threat, a disruptive agent within the world. Their aggressive infiltration into the country's businesses, public, civil society, education institutions like schools and universities, and governmental agencies are now recognized as a threat, and countries all over the world are pushing back. The language used in the capital cities of Australia, Europe, and America are encouraging. The European Union now sees China as a systemic rival. At the Munich Security Conference on 14th of February this year, the United States Defense Secretary Mark Esper said US allies should wake up to the Chinese threat. US Speaker Nancy Pelosi described Huawei as an insidious form of aggression. Our Grant Sharp, the UK Transport Minister, said in terms of HS2, he said that China has no planning system, they have no legal system, and they have no respect for people's property. So, China most certainly has many concerns and fears over the possible erosion of its mighty economic power they think they have. Chairman Xi Jinping faces not only internal challenges, but also major difficulties over the long run. Trade disputes with the United States, criticisms of the business and political practices, the Hong Kong Uprising, and the landslide victory of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, the re-election of Taiwan's pro-independence President Tsai Ing-wen, global pressure over the policies in East Turkestan with the horrifying incarceration of over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in the 21st century. This year, we saw four large conferences organized by the Central Tibetan administration to address and put across the wishes of the Tibetan people with regards to the succession and reincarnation of the great 14th Dalai Lama, to counter the interference and blatant announcement made by the Communist Party that China has the right to select the next Dalai Lama. In October 2019, during the official visit to Dharamsala, Samuel Taylor Brownback, the US Ambassador at Large for the International Religious Freedom, reiterated US support towards His Holiness and the Tibetan people. He also echoed the resolutions on the reincarnation adopted by the 8th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups, the 3rd Special General Meeting of the Tibetans, and the 14th Tibetan Religious Conference also stated that His Holiness has the sole proprietary, sole authority concerning his reincarnation. The United States of America has supported our call that there should not be any political interference from China in the selection and succession process of the next Dalai Lama. The United States has, in fact, enshrined such a support in the US law through the Tibet Policy and Support Act. I would like to say thank you very much for all of you here today and all the people who have supported the Tibetan cause who could not be here today, and the respective governments and parliamentarians, individuals, organizations who have supported Tibet through thick and thin. We value it very much. I want to say Tim was wonderful this morning, giving us the time to be with you. So I conclude this presentation with my prayers that all the wishes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be fulfilled with all your support, and hope Tibet will be free once again in the near future. Thank you very much.